like to use this as an example of how our fascia was flowing as children. Spring-loaded, no injuries, infinite energy. I'm always reestablishing the boundary that when you've experienced trauma, you are a mighty tree and you're just growing into that new mightiness. So to me, we have these three spheres that are always working at a rhythm. And this rhythm is poetic and intertwined. It's our melody. So many people that think they're struggling with crazy diagnoses and autoimmune disease, I urge you to witness your breath.
Today I have the pleasure of speaking with Brooke McPoyle, and I'm so excited to have this conversation with her. She has been teaching breath work since 2014. She is a golfer, so a D1 level collegiate golfer, which is really interesting. I might have some questions about that as well. She is the Natural Health Center co-founder, and she is also a professionally trained singer and also a voice coach, and studies and works with the fascia, which is one of my first questions that I will have for Brooke. And of course, she helps her clients working with the fascia, and amongst other things in terms of their healing journey. And her hashtag, of course, is @musicalbreathwork. So you're going to have to check her out after our conversation. But Brooke, welcome to my podcast. I'm so excited to be able to connect with you today.
It's an honor and a privilege. Thanks for having me.
So let's get right to it. And I know that you work with fascia. So can you do a little bit of an explanation? I know you've got some demos to show to us as well. Yeah. What exactly is the fascia in our body, and why is it so important for our health?
What a great question. The fascia is a triple helix collagen fiber network. And up until about 5 years ago, it was very common for people to describe it as the saran wrap around everything. And to me, this feels just a little misguided with what's currently coming out about it. And as I continue to look at all of the research, I've been trying to find more illustrative ways to make it make sense. So imagine this triple helix structure holding the shape of a straw. And in the straw, it's moving fluid through it and around it. Now, if we took 50 straws and wrapped them together, now we're dealing with a pretty strong surface. But in between that strong surface, there's also fascia, but it's almost like a cotton. So even though fascia has been described as this saran wrap, I like to describe it as 3 different layers. Some like an industrial strength rubber band, and these are our major fascia bands, which is what I help people make flow again and kind of tune the body. And I have a very specific sequence that we follow that works with these major fascia bands and how they want to be tuned without ripping or tearing or shearing the fascia. And in between those major fascia bands, there's these little cotton mycelium network fascia. And this is, to me, what's been so confusing is we have fascia that wraps the joints, that wraps the muscles, but inside of the muscle, each muscle fiber is wrapped with the fascia. Oh. And then when you go into the deeper layer, the fascia is actually moving into the cells through something called integrins and wrapping around mitochondria. So mitochondria is that little organelle in the cell that burns glucose, right? Burns our energy. Yeah. And the mitochondria can divide and move outside of the cell. This is why people are loving the cold plunge culture, because they're increasing their brown fat, which is more mitochondria tissue, right? But that's actually happening through the fascia system.
Oh, so there's a connection to the fascia for cold exposure. And when we always talk about mitochondrial health, and this is so important in terms of longevity, I didn't ever realize that connection through the fascia. So thank you for that. Wow, that is incredible.
It's very new, so don't judge yourself on that at all, because at the recent Fascia Congress, there's been a pathologist, a German pathologist came forward, and he's been doing pathology for 20 years, and pathologists look at the little tiny slides of the tissues, right? And they have this word that they use for the striations within the slides that don't make sense, and they're just like, oh, it's damage. What he realized a couple years ago was that was actually fascia. So he came forward and he's like, you guys, I am a pathologist, and for 25, I've taught thousands of people that these are striations that were damaged. And he's like, it's fascia now. And now we need to have a way bigger conversation about what fascia is. And he just keeps seeing it in every single tissue. And this to me is the beauty of what fascia has to offer, because when we see how systemic it is, when we see that it connects to everything in the body, the connective tissue, the interstitium, actually becomes this way bigger conversation about how the electricity in the body is traveling. And because the fascia is moving fluids through it and around it, it has properties that are very misunderstood.
Mm.
So it's polymorphic and metaphasic, meaning that when it's not flowing, it looks dense and feels dense. And that's what we experience as adhesions, or like little crunchy knots in the system,
Right,
right?
right. Which, as
And
anybody who does any type of sports, or if you've had injuries, or you just go to the massage therapist and they find those knots, those crunchy parts. That's what you're talking about, right? So that would be an
exactly.
adhesion. Okay.
Yeah, in some of the research conversations, they call it densification. And then
Okay.
some of them call it adhesions. And adhesion coming from the word to adhere, to be glued together.
Okay.
And the way that research and therapists have been playing with how to move the adhesion, to me, has is the most interesting conversation, because for the last 100 years we've been treating fascia based on Dr. Ida Rolf's philosophy, which is find the stuck spots and make the stuck spots flow
Right.
by manually manipulating the area. And we do that by using our hands, by using tools. And when I got into my fascia experimentation, I kept asking myself the question, how can we do this without ripping or tearing or shearing? Because as I was going through my own practice of trying to recondition the body, I wasn't excited about needing to have a day of recovery. I
Right.
kind of wanted to be able to do something gentler where I could still train. My grandma could do it.
Yeah.
And by asking those questions, I got more into the fluid that's flowing through and around this fascia, because that's actually what stopped working. So these adhesions, we can look at them biomechanically as the fascia stuck together. So let's make it unstuck. And in
Mm-hmm.
doing so, what we end up doing often is ripping it. So let's just say this
Uh,
is us as a kid.
yeah.
Is this going to be easy to describe for you? This is Buckminster Fuller's omnidirectional ball. He invented this to replace our car tires, but it's still just a child's toy.
Yeah.
But I like to use this as an example of how our fascia was flowing as children. Spring loaded, no injuries, infinite energy. We can jump off our friend's roof and there's no damage.
Yeah.
But when we experience our first, let's say, injury or cut, or we're super dehydrated and we're moving our tissues, these start to bond together. Like, so this would be an adhesion.
Uh-huh.
And what happens is the whole structure is impinged
I
because of
see.
this one spot. Now,
Right.
because our brain loves to not be in pain, what happens is we end up dulling the mechanoreceptors to this area after about 2 weeks.
Okay.
And instead, to create balance, or let's just say we continue to train, right? What happens is this opposite side will start to rip a little bit. And we
Ah.
won't feel this over here. We'll feel this. So
Uh-huh.
often when we go to our therapist and we say, hey, I have a problem in my neck,
Right.
will you work this out for me? They focus here and
Yes.
not here.
Uh-huh.
And this has been the most difficult part to explain to people. But
Right.
if we take care of the original source, we can actually make this spring loaded. But the
Really?
way that we can, yeah, are you following me so
I
far?
am totally, because I'll tell you a story about, some of the therapy that I've done with my patients over the years, and yeah, it totally
Yeah,
ties into this, and now visually I can actually see it and why this is so
yeah.
important. So continue, please. Yes.
So this is another example. This is just a kinetic rave bracelet, but it proves what I'm trying to
Ah.
demonstrate so
Yeah.
well.
Yeah.
So when the fascia is gliding, we can do a bunch of stuff with our body. We're highly mobile. There's really no pain. The joints are working properly. But as soon as we experience an injury, there's an adhesion. And it blocks the flow, because the fluid that's moving through and around the fascia is hyaluronic acid. Now, what's going through it, there's a conversation between the Chinese doctors and the
Yeah.
German doctors and the American doctors. That
Uh-huh.
so I can't say that that's hyaluronic acid,
Okay.
but it's a conversation. But the fluid outside of it is certainly hyaluronic acid. And hyaluronic acid is one acid molecule that houses 1,600 water molecules. So it's
Mm-hmm.
like a surface tension of water. And our body makes it. It's in our tears, it's in our saliva, it's in between our joints. So when the hyaluronic acid gets stuck, it stops the flow. And instead of gliding, everything kind of gets stuck. Well, the current philosophy has been where it's stuck, make movement, create motion. So they rip this apart and then we wait for the body to heal. And
Mm-hmm.
people have gotten extraordinary results from those tactics. So I'm here to only improve my philosophy because I don't want to rip anything.
Yeah.
You know, if I'm brushing my hair, I don't want to rip anything. I would prefer
Yeah.
to be nice and gentle.
Right.
So the technique that I use combines 8 different rules in order to, instead of ripping this apart, we are going to compress the structure.
Mm.
And then when we follow the other 8 rules, what happens is we start to incite the fascia sites in the fascia to make more hyaluronic acid.
Mm.
So instead of waiting for the ripped hoses of the fascia to heal, all we're doing is empowering the fluid to glide in between again, because this fluid is electrostatic. And that's been a very confused term and confusing characteristics for people. So if we picture 2 magnets, right?
Yeah.
And the negatives are together or the positives are together, I can just bounce this other magnet off my hand here. And that's the same way the fluid's working.
Uh-huh.
So this fluid doesn't have to be, in my opinion, treated aggressively. We're talking about an electrical charge. So
Mm.
instead of like ripping the tubes apart and waiting for them to recover, which would still work, people still get really great, fast results that way. But I would rather take this electrostatic charge where the flow is stuck and
Mm-hmm.
just turn the electricity back on so the flow is reestablished with no injury to the tissues.
Wow. Wow. Well, that's
So
so
it's
fascinating. So this is something, just to clarify for people that are either watching us or listening to our podcast today. This is something that you help, one-on-one with your clients, right? So is it something you can do virtually, or they actually physically have to see you?
No, I have a course I built online, a digital course that's available. So I did about 150 one-on-ones online, as well as I teach a lot locally. And
Wow.
about after the 150th one, I hired a film crew
Ah, good,
to
good.
film
Yeah.
it. So I have it broken into a 30-minute science segment and then a 75-minute walkthrough. And the
Nice.
walkthrough is broken into chunks, but the most important parts only take 20 minutes. So
Oh,
I tell
amazing.
people the first yeah, so it's efficient and you can actually do it while you watch something.
Oh,
So
wow.
the
Yeah.
sequence isn't mentally taxing. It's ideal if you do it in silence and stillness
Yes,
and
yes.
really feel yourself. But I've done it for hours just in front of a good documentary or listening to a good album. So it's easy to bake into your routine.
Right.
And we focus on the lower body for the first 6 to 8 months. And there's a lot of reasons why we focus on it from the ground up, which is
Mhm.
significantly different than how most people are treating the stuck tissue.
Yeah. And okay, so back to my story. So I do craniosacral therapy, which of course focuses in on the fascia. And, in working with patients, I even worked on my daughter yesterday, and she said, like, Mom, because she's a basketball player, and she had like a tough game, and she's like, I'm like sore everywhere. Can you help me? And I first started, it's funny because I first started with massage, right? And like, I'm tight here. Then she knew herself, her intuition, whatever. She said, no, Mom, maybe you should do that other thing. She doesn't, with the craniosacral therapy. I'm like, yeah, you know what? I think we're going to get further with that. And then, realizing that the fascia in her ankle and a chronic ankle issue was manifesting elsewhere in the body, because yes, the fascia is all connected. But now when I saw your demo with how, the fluidity of this is such a big issue, right? In the fact that that fluid needs to be able to flow. And sometimes by not taking the time, I think, for our listeners who are listening to this and say, yeah, I've got a chronic issue in my hip, my back, whatever. If you don't take the time and you don't do the right things for yourself, things could potentially get worse, but at the very least, it's never going to improve, right? So this is something that I think anybody who has tuned into us today, if this is a message for you to, like maybe take a look at this, you've got to learn more. And I'm gonna have a few more questions for you, of course. But being able to do a course like the one that you offer might be something that is groundbreaking. If you've tried the massage, you've tried the other types of therapies that haven't really focused in on the fascia. And back to and I know this wasn't one of the things that I had planned to talk about, but starting with the feet, I've seen one of your posts about this. Why is it so important that we start, if we've got issues in our body, pain and trauma and whatever, drama, which could be psychospiritual as well, right? Why is it so important that we focus on our feet?
I'm so happy you asked, because I built this model specifically for this question.
Oh, awesome. Awesome. Yes.
So this is a replica of Kenneth Snelson's Project X. And people don't realize that the fascia conversation really got stuck because our medical philosophy was stuck in biomechanics. And it wasn't until 1980 that Dr. Stephen Levin was the first one that connected the tensegrity conversation, which is an architectural approach invented by Buckminster Fuller, inspired by the sculptor artist Kenneth Snelson, about how our bones are actually floating between these industrial strength rubber bands. And the best way to describe this is with a model. So I have two X's here, right? And it's a tuned structure. So every time I move it, it tweaks a little bit, which is just like our body. So imagine if the two strings here represent our feet. Now remember, our feet have 26 bones in it compared to the 4 bones of the whole leg. So if we can just put on our engineer hats and like pretend we're not medical people, we're just building people, and this is going to be our foundation, right?
Yes.
If I have a 5-foot structure, because I'm all of 5 feet tall, right, and I squish my toes together, which is like every high heel or
like
cleat.
What I'm wearing. Yep. For those of you who can see mine. Yep.
So when we're developing as children and we get put in shoes that have a small toe box, right? If we just think like a building and we're going to put 4 stories on top of this, what kind of building would this shape have over time compared to if we had the 26 phalanges completely spread out with a nice arch?
Mm-hmm.
When you think of balance, the walking gait, the running gait, and our ability to jump. So another way to describe why we start at the feet and we only work the lower body for 6 to 8 months. Imagine if you have tension in your foot. Let's pretend like we only used our hands like we do our feet, right? So this is always in a glove and I'm just doing this. There's no more dexterity. What happens is your fingers get glued together. Okay, so the fascia in between these bones get glued. And then instead of you having dexterity, right, and strength in individual fingers, which is necessary as a musician, we weight train our little biceps on our fingertips.
I believe it, yeah.
Yeah. When this turns into a hoof, you end up with wrist issues and elbow issues, right? So the more often we're using our hands with not good dexterity, we're going to end up with mobility issues here. Now, when we're walking on our toes and we have lazy toes because they're glued together, we start to walk on the outside of our foot often. And this creates tension down something called the lateral band, which starts on the outside of the foot, runs up across the knee, across the hip, and through to the intercostals and attaches to the bottom of the neck. So what I continue to see in my clients that have neck issues, tension headaches, TMJ, shoulder issues, neck issues, is they go to a therapist to take care of that tension level and it keeps releasing, keeps coming back. So if we pretend that, this is a normal person and their toes are really weak on one side. And the way to test this is if you can separate your pinky toes on both sides. Often people can do it on one, but not the other. That's an
very
indicator.
Challenging. Yes. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So let's say you have one foot where you have no dexterity left. And on that calf, there's a lot of tightness. So what happens is the lower body starts to tight. Now let's pretend this grade of the bottom of the X is your hip. Right? So the hip starts to drop down a little bit. But this top part of our body, our head always needs equilibrium so we don't have brain damage, right? So our body compensates intelligently to bring balance back. Does that make sense? So as
absolutely.
the lower body has tension and torques the hip, the upper body will compensate with tension to create more balance. But if we focus on pain spots, we're only focusing on the consequence. So when people work with me, they all come to me with neck problems. And I'm just like,
Yeah.
that's great. We're going to focus on your feet. And they're like, okay, but when can we focus on the neck? I'm like, when 80% of the tension is gone from the lower body. So
Right.
I invented a vocabulary to help us determine which adhesions need the most priority. Because as we start to go through the 7 steps of or really the 8 rules of it, you start to become very acquainted with what's happening underneath the tissues. So we think
Yeah.
we take good care of ourselves because our skin is nice, right?
Yeah.
But what's happening a half an inch or 2 inches underneath that
Right.
becomes a very humbling dialogue with the body. And as we feel into these knots, there's actually indicators of how compressed the knot has become, this densification. So if you hit an electrical spot, I don't have science to prove this yet, but it's in my witnessing, this is what I continue to see. Where there's lightning, when we hit a nugget that feels like lightning, the nerve has become impinged, and there's normally neuropathy on that side of this right down the chain a bit. And when
Wow.
we unpinge the electrical spot, the neuropathy is no longer there. Now, there's a lot of things that cause neuropathy, but I think
Yeah.
some of it is collapsed fascia.
That makes sense. And this is why acupuncture probably works, right? Because you're inducing a metal into one of these nodes of, concentrated energy and electrical, stimulation with the acupuncture needle. So isn't that fascinating? Wow.
There's a lot of, to me, fascia will probably end up bridging the Eastern and the Western concepts
Yeah.
between how this electrostatic fluid is actually a conductive nature. And while they argue about the vocabulary, I, as an athlete, wanted to completely experiment.
Oh, yeah, of
And as
course.
my yeah, I'm ready. I'm ready to recondition it. I'm ready to make it flow optimally. And as I've done this, it was about 6 months into training myself that I started gymnastics. And I'm 34. I thought
What?
gymnastics was going to never be a thing again. I became so spring loaded. I had no more knee pain. I had no more hip pain. And I just wanted to see what I was capable of. And
Yeah.
so far, my body has held up fantastic. But I regularly maintain my fascia. So now I'm at a point where 3 days a week, I just do my routine and my body it seems to stay at this spring loaded mechanism.
Wow. Well, that's something that I think can all endeavor to definitely learn more about and try for ourselves. I can't wait to get started on your program, to be honest. That's like fantastic. I think for longevity, I mean, this is one of those key aspects, because when you lose your mobility, when you lose your ability to do just easy daily tasks, then that is your freedom at the end of the day, right? And I've actually visited one of the blue zones. I've said this to one of my other podcast guests, and one of the things that I really, took to heart was the fact that, yeah, yes, you have your family around you to help you, but even these elderly people in their hundreds, they still could get up out of a chair, like no problem. Like it's not something that they had to think about. They got up, they greeted me, then went and sat down. Like it was something like that. That is longevity, to be able to still hold your own sort of when you are aging and hopefully not be in pain. So, yeah, fantastic. It's so timely that you're here and that we're talking about these things, because I think a lot of people do have pain and they've tried everything else and they simply don't know. And as you said, the science is catching up with, what some cultures have known for centuries, but not everybody likes needles. When we're talking about acupuncture, not
Yeah.
everybody, even believes in the fact that it can be helpful. Although the people that do, experience some types of healing modalities, they do experience some relief. But and here's the thing. Here's a great question with your technique. You said that there's a maintenance aspect of it as well, right? So it's one thing to sort of fix maybe the main issues, the density and the fascia, but I'm assuming that there is going to be a bit of a maintenance, just to kind of like you said, to stay spring loaded. Is that correct?
Yeah, if we can imagine the perspective of, in 1938, the first nylon toothbrush was invented.
Wow.
So, yeah. So it wasn't even 100 years ago. before people started to say, hey, we should brush our teeth twice a day.
Yeah.
And here's something tastier than just like a lye solution on a 4 bristle brush wooden thing.
Yeah.
And George Washington, who was a wealthy man back in his day, at 40, he had lost all his teeth, which was very common, and he had wooden enamel dentures.
Wow.
So here in 1938, the toothbrush came out. And then during the World Wars, they created a propaganda routine to teach the children to brush their teeth twice a day. And it became common knowledge. And now around the world, everybody brushes their teeth twice a day.
Yeah.
So you never go to the dentist and you're like, I'm done. I never have to brush my teeth again.
Right.
And in the fascia philosophy, every time we are hurting ourselves, working out dehydrated, sitting for too long, these are things that can build up stagnation in the flow of our fascia.
Right.
And people don't realize that we're flowing tubes because so much of us has become stagnant over time. So the version of aging, we're told, is lack of mobility. And that's something I want to switch. It's not aging. That's just a stuck flow. You can have that as a kid if you wanted.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's true.
But yeah, and as an adult, we can reinstate that flow, but it takes flowing the fascia again. And to me, if we're going to do this as a maintenance exercise, I want it to be as gentle as possible. I want to be able to do it at home without an expensive therapist. And I want to be able to do the deep fascia tissue, not just the first inch and a half, which is usually what most therapists are working with, unless you're having a deep tissue person. So it's nice. I feel like there's a good win. There's a good at-home, simple, effective way that we can start to take care of this and restore that fluidity we had as kids.
Yeah. Wow, that's amazing. Now, have you found correlations between, emotional traumas in people's past that is going to affect the fascia in some way?
Well, I love to think of people as champions. And in America right now, there is a lot of seminars. Like 50% of the health seminars available to me locally are trauma workshops. And unfortunately, I feel like there's some good in it, and there's more people hiding behind the shield of trauma and using it as an excuse to not take responsibility for certain things. And I'm always trying to draw a healthy metaphor to my garden. I'm a big gardener. I have 3 acres in South Florida.
Oh, wow.
I do a lot of experiments. Yeah.
That's amazing.
I play with sequences, some like old electroculture stuff, some like really weird. We do like we have a worm farm. We have a composting thing forever. I have a couple beehives.
Oh, wow.
Small operation, but enough for me to like play with a lot of the elements.
Yeah.
And as we experience hurricanes down here, the trees that are the most mighty in my yard are the ones that are alone in the largest areas with no protection from other trees. They don't have the same root structure around it, and they handled blunt trauma from all of the hurricanes. So I am yes, when people are exploring the deep tissues of their body and they are in silence and stillness, often there is a internal conversation of where that stuckness happened. There is insights and emotional releases. And what I encourage people to do, one of my rules is to respect the 80% pain threshold and to deep breathe. And when we are gentle with ourselves, I feel like we have all the tools we need to allow ourselves to heal. So in a gentle routine that we don't try to blow through everything in one segment, we're going to take a long-term approach. So these things can kind of ebb and flow within people. There is a correlation to me, depending on how tuned in they are with their own intuition, their own meditations and journaling. However, I'm always reestablishing the boundary that when you've experienced trauma, you are a mighty tree and you're just growing into that new mightiness because nature shows us the truth, right? So the trauma makes us strong. And I feel like if we could really embody that for people, it changes the conversation.
Thank you so much for saying that because, that needed to be said. So thank you. It's brilliant. Okay, another question that I have for you. Can you explain this whole heart and breath coherence. What is happening there? Because I know part of your practice has to do with breath work. So please, for our listeners and viewers who aren't aware, can you enlighten us on this connection?
Absolutely. It's I almost want to use an illustrative metaphor for this. Imagine we have three spheres in our body, and these spheres are like pumps, right? And the first sphere is our heart. It's this giant magnetic current that's creating a rhythm within all of our tissues. Then we have the breath. And the breath is this entire combustion engine that is regulating and making things rhythmic within our tissues. And our breath immediately changes with stress or with relaxation. So as someone scares you, that mouth shallow inhale, it's biological reaction. And then when we are relaxed, favorite jammies, like your favorite beverage, there's a that deep releasing sigh, right?
Yes. Yeah.
And then we have our brain waves. And our brain, the neurons are communicating to each other through these chemical and electrical signals that are measured as sound waves. So to me, we have these three spheres that are always working at a rhythm. And this rhythm is poetic and intertwined. It's our melody. The thing about it is when we live in a chronic state of tension, let's just say you're sitting at your computer, right? So your heart rate should be low and your breath rate should be relaxed. However, the brain waves are operating at a stress level. So when we're talking and communicating, we're in beta, which is a 16 to 30 hertz. When we're in stress, we're around 24 to 30 hertz. Now, when we're at 24 to 30 hertz, usually our breath rate, so our breaths per minute, is mirroring that 24 to 30. So what we want to do is bring ourselves to the brainwave that we choose, our desire with our breath, because the heart will regulate. The heart you don't tell your heart to beat. Your heart is the unconscious pattern, right? So when we change the breath rate from a 24 breaths per minute to a 4 breaths a minute, we can navigate this conscious brainwave pull down, kind of like shifting the gear in your car.
Yeah.
And to me, the meditations, particularly in America, so many of the meditation classes you go to are guided with language. And when we're using language, we are projecting onto our neurons certain things, and we are keeping our brain waves between 8 to 15, which is alpha brain waves. And there is something else for us to explore and to discover, I believe, in this generation. And the way that we get there is by dropping deeper than alpha brainwaves. And there's theta, and this is where we were as children. 2 to 7 years old, we live in theta. Theta is where new neurons can collect. We're in off-roading mode between the neurons. It's a the more rich your brain is, the more beauty you see when we're in theta. Now, when we can maintain theta, which is 4 to 7 hertz, so imagine dropping our breath rate to like 2 breaths a minute, maintaining that, we have the opportunity to take a little bridge to something called gamma. Now, gamma is 31 to 100, so huge range of voltage. Now, when we're experiencing this as Americans, it's like a half second to 1 second. And I feel like many people who are trying to do that transcendental meditation, they slip into these spaces and the body starts to convulse. And that's not happening in the monks that are maintaining gamma for 8 hours. So I feel like when the brain is getting jacked into these amazing frequencies that are way more optimally, it's a symphony. This is where this is the goal, hang out in gamma. This is when everything is way more optimal. Like, what are we capable of if we're able to hang out there? But the hardwiring, the fiber optic, the thing that's bringing the brain connected to the body is skitzing out. It's impinged some way if we're experiencing a convulsion. This is my opinion. So what's holding the nervous system in place is the fascia. So to me, if the fascia has tension throughout it, the electricity isn't being brought through the system. So as we tune the fascia, I actually believe that we change the brain's ability to release tension and experience a huge, wider range of brain frequencies consciously if we're using our breath.
Well, yeah. maybe people are hearing this for the first time because, yeah, I mean, I've never heard anything and a description of the breath in such a succinct, connection to the fascia. Yeah, that's going to have to sit with me for a bit because it just makes so much sense. Yeah, one of my other guests, I don't know if you saw that podcast with Erwan Lacour, and he's a breath
Oh, I missed
hold
that one.
champion. Yeah, you've got to watch it.
Okay, I will.
So, yeah, part of his breath and breathing technique is about slowing down the breath. And so making these connections now with the fascia and the water within the network as well, which I find so fascinating from a quantum biology perspective, right? Which I've done a lot of
Yes.
research on, and the whole connection with natural sunlight, of course, and for our mitochondrial health and tying that into the water that our mitochondria makes. And of course, that's going to be translated through the fascia and this entire electrical system. It's all connected. And, to be able to speak with someone like you yourself, today who has really honed down, some of this information about the fascia and created a technique to help people, it's amazing. It's amazing. Okay, I want to ask because I know that you are a singer, songwriter, vocal coach, and how is music and the frequencies of different tones of music, how does that help us with our physiology and our fascia?
Wow, what a good question. Well, there's two ways I want to answer that. And the first being the breath. To me, the breath is the gateway drug to sound. And
Yes.
as a singer, so the standard untrained lung can hold 5 to 7 cubic liters. So if somebody holds their breath for about a minute, they're around 5 cubic liters of capacity in there. But when we break down the basic physiology of how to create space in the lung field, and the lungs are so different than what people, than the cute little illustrations in our science book.
Yeah.
They're asymmetrical,
Yeah.
they open crazy, like they're able to quadruple in capacity. So the world record holders are at 22 cubic liters.
Wow.
So to double someone's breath capacity takes about 6 weeks of training. And I'm
Yeah.
a little cocky about it now because I've done it so much with my clients
I know.
where I'm
Yeah.
like, train with me. Yeah, 5 days a week. I need 10 minutes of your time and we'll double you in 6 weeks. That's
Wow.
basically like the routine. And it's just getting familiar with how to feel the muscles that
Yeah.
need to get out of the way. And then we make those muscles flexible, then we make them strong. And
Oh.
as a singer, we're taught to control the airflow. And I had a huge disagreement between my opera singer and my rock and roll singer. And it was about how to control air pressure. And their disagreement just took me down a rabbit hole because I was like, well, I want to know the truth. Like, which one is it? So I ended up creating a technique that combines it. And when you start to shape the breath, so instead of just an expansion in a collapse of the tissues, we actually start to control the gas flow. So it's very easy to drop into a 1 breath a minute sequence because you're dumping and holding the oxygen into the lower lung field where we have the majority of the alveoli. And then we are crushing and moving the exhale down. And gas wants to rise. So unless you're
Mm-hmm.
trained, we don't really exhale properly ever. But when we start to exhale properly, your breath hold gets way longer, your natural breath rate drops. And by doing that, we actually start to change your normal brainwave patterns. So by taking somebody from a 1 minute breath hold to a 2 minute breath hold, we
Mm.
just dropped your natural BPMs by, 7 to 12 by itself, naturally, automatically, without you having to think about it.
Wow.
Um, when we add sound to that, because the vagus nerve runs off the upper cervical spine, and this is something I educate people with a lot of diagrams in my brain and breath connection lecture,
Yeah.
the fastest way to drop out of that stress response is by humming.
Uh-huh.
And humming is simple, but when you add a couple tweaks that us singers do, right, which is placing your tongue, okay, if you suction cup the back third of the tongue to the soft palate,
Yeah.
and we basically pull. Oh, I have a model.
Okay.
Hey.
Yeah. Perfect. Perfect. Show us. Yeah. Your new model.
I'm
It's a
like,
new one, right?
this is brand new. Yes, I think I need to name her too. I named my skeleton back there. His name is Sam.
Oh,
And this
Sam.
just got in yesterday. Yeah, Sam is
Awesome.
back there.
Hi,
Sam's the
Sam.
man. He's
We have
the
Lucy here on
skeleton
the
man.
set, so my viewers,
Oh,
yeah, we have
nice.
Lucy for my yeah anatomy lesson. Yeah.
I love it. It's amazing to have a skeleton around. You learn so much by accident because you're just like, oh yeah, there's only one bone there. Like, when you're doing the fascia release, people will say, how do you know it's not a bone? And I just point to the skeleton and I'm like, it feels like a bone, but that's a fascia adhesion.
Wow. Yeah.
So the soft palate, right? The hard palate is at the top of the mouth.
Yeah.
And then as soon as that runs out, but in the hard palate, there's a suture. And that suture, because our brain, as a craniosacral therapist, you know this, like
Yeah. Yeah.
the skull is connected in plates. Now, if we suction cup the tongue to the soft palate here and we pull this down, we're actually increasing our nasal flow. We're opening up the center of the skull for more airflow. And then
Mm-hmm.
when we hum, we're resonating the empty chamber. So as
Oh.
an opera singer, right?
Mm-hmm.
I haven't sung for professional opera, but I get trained by this woman who's brilliant, Hilary Ginther. She plays like the queen of operas, like all over the place. And as
Wow.
an opera singer, you have to belt through the sound waves of a symphony and reach the guy in the 50th row with no mic. And the way that
Wow.
you do that is by resonating all of the empty chambers of your body. So you're not just singing from here, you're singing with your entire being.
Wow.
And when we hum with our tongue in that elevated position, you can actually vibrate this so
Really?
much clearly. Yeah.
Okay, do it for us. Can you do it for us? Do it really quick.
Yeah. I actually want to show you what happens too. So if I hit a low note, I'm vibrating here
Uh-huh.
really hard, which
Okay.
is perfect for vagus nerve toning. And vagus nerve is that fancy word for the parasympathetic system that wraps 90%, right?
Yeah.
But our dogs, like our animals, when they're crying to us,
Yeah.
they make those squeaky sounds, and dolphins, those
Yeah.
sounds are coming through the skull. So that's
Ah,
coming from here.
really?
So controlling resonance tone only happens after you have a good breath, right?
Yeah.
So when the breath is established, we can start to play with controlling the resonance of the empty cavity. So the chest voice, all sound comes from the vocal cords, but the
Mm.
chest voice is we're resonating the sound off of this empty cavity. Then head voice is we're resonating the sound off of the center here. Nasal voice is when we're resonating it off of the nasal glands. But by learning how to sit into the breath and resonate through, they call it the middle section. So in
Uh-huh.
opera, the front of your face is called the light and the back of your head is called the dark.
Oh,
And you're
wow.
looking for the balance. I know this,
Yeah.
it gets very Star Warsy.
Yeah.
It's almost like you're throwing a column of sound through the center of your body while you're settling into the breath. So all the rock
Wow.
singers that hit the note
Yeah,
and lean
yeah.
back,
Good. Yeah,
that's
yeah.
not opera posture.
Right.
Opera posture is you sit into it and
Uh-huh.
there's like a whole setup, just like golf would be. Grip, stance,
Really?
posture, ball position. In opera, there's a stance, there's a situation. You got to drop the jaw, you got to drop the
Wow.
larynx, you got to activate the soft palate, and you move your ears back. It's like a whole thing.
Really? I had no idea. Wow.
Yes.
So,
Yeah, and sound itself is spectacular. I play 8 instruments now. Every year, I want to add one more
oh my
because it's all
goodness.
patterns.
Yeah.
Because you're just pushing a string, you know, anybody can push a string. Learning how to do it consistently is the problem.
Right. And yeah.
But who knows what's happening when you're playing an instrument on top of your body and you're regulating your breath rate and you're consciously dropping your mind out of a language. So in my band, we don't sing in English. We sing in a couple other languages. When we released a song from a language that was scried in the 15th century, and there is something shapeless and amorphous
Yeah.
about using vowels, and the cymatic studies around vowels are infinitely fascinating. I mean, it expands the molecular structure or it collapses it. As soon as you use a consonant, there's like a cutoff
Huh.
in the shape, but vowels are very open. And there's a couple interesting doctors down here, like Dr. Yaffe is someone who studies deeply light language, and light language is a very circular vowel shaped language. And I've always
Hmm.
felt as a singer, when we're shaping vowels, there's something very expansive about the sound itself. And in operas are still sung in other languages because there's more vowels and how you can
Oh,
shape
yes.
it.
Yeah. Well, that makes sense. Yeah, I never thought of that before, but wow. Tell us about, yeah, your athletic career a little bit, and what are some of the things that you do, because you are a D1 golfer, to stay fit? And, you know, if you tweak something, like what are some of your sort of daily, beyond your fascial work, what are some of the things that you do to stay healthy yourself?
Oh, I fell in love with fasting about 8 years ago. So I'm basically at a mono meal. If I'm training really hard, I'll add in my extra really great protein shake. But I love me just a great juice and sushi. But it's very easy for me to just drink a little green tea in the morning or coffee and hydrate, obviously. Um, I always get sunshine in the morning and make sure that I'm moving my body. And I often do my breath practice to clear my mind. Like before I dive into the computer, I want to get my mind awake. I want to clear out anything that's in my system. Our adenoids sometimes can get a little stuffy, and pollen changes, weather change, our stress levels change. So I really like waking up and doing my breath routine. Um, but I train kind of hard. I don't really ever feel like college stopped for me. I still
Oh,
read a
good.
ton of
Yeah.
books, and I changed sports in a way. Like for the last decade, I play very little golf. I maintain my 4 handicap, and my brother still beats me. And my dad's an amazing player, so I'm like
Oh,
stoked when I
wow.
tie. Yeah,
Oh, good for
and
you.
but I do spinal mobilities. Everybody gets mad because they'll be like, Brooke, you haven't played in 4 months. How are you still hitting the ball? And I was like, I do my spine.
Yeah,
So
keeping it
I
mobile.
still
Yeah.
used, yes. And it's the connection in golf, the way to be consistent. Once you have 10,000 hours in the sport, you really just want to hit pure shots. And just like an opera singer who needs to project, in order to do that, you have to hit pure notes. So a pure golf shot is driven by the ground. So at 100 pounds, I wanted to hit the ball, 260, which is LPGA tour quality. So I had to get really efficient with something called ground force reaction. And I got to work with the inventor of the pedar system when I was a kid. My dad was like a great investor of his, so it was such a cool thing to accidentally be exposed to. But
Wow.
you learn how to pedal shift the weight on your feet in order
Uh-huh.
to control your hip torque, which is an incredibly different way than other people do it. But by doing so, I can control, kind of like a kung fu person, a
Mm-hmm.
maximum amount of power without a lot of motion.
Hmm.
So when I'm training gymnastics now, I'm learning so much about how the golf swing works, because there's a serious overlap about building momentum when you're doing a hurdle and then you're doing a cartwheel, then you're doing a round off, and then you're throwing a back tuck or a back handspring. There's a horizontal motion that is like skipping a rock, and that's what you learn when you play golf, is how, and hockey players do it. You horizontally create momentum through the body, and this is done because of how our fascia bands are wrapped on top of each other. So the spiral line, the major fascia band called the spiral line, is triple helixed basically around
Mm.
our lower leg and then our upper body. So when we create upper body torque from the lower body, we
Mm-hmm.
can drive it. So I train with, really it's intermittent fasting. I regularly meditate. I read a lot, and I feel like I'm in my purpose. So I
Yeah.
kind of have a lot of energy. But I do train very much with my fascia and my spine in mind. And it's when you have a playful mindset and good energy, I think it's very easy to train hard. And I
Yeah.
happen to be around incredible athletes in my circles that are doing muscle ups on rings and then going into a handstand and making it look so easy. And they're older than me,
Oh,
that it's
wow.
like, I want to do it too.
Yeah. Yeah.
So there's an advantage for me being in like a team element that I find very naturally enthusiastic, which I believe in good coaching. And I don't know if that's just because I've been coached my whole life, but as an adult, you can go to the gym 3 days a week, but like if you have that trainer that you meet with every Monday and every Friday
Yeah.
that has the warrior spirit that like pulls the champion out of you, and
Yeah.
like, you have to sit with your feelings on that day that you don't want to go, and you're like, I'm going to disappoint them if I cancel. I think that's a
Right.
healthy thing
I
to
think so.
maintain as an adult.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. That's some of the feedback that being on social media, and I have a weekly show, is a live show. It's accountability at the end of the day, right? And I think people, and they've shared that with me, through the commenting that, yeah, I'd love to come and just show up and learn more. From a health perspective, every once a week, it's that accountability. And I think knowledge is always power. And the more that we're learning and we can learn from people that know a lot more than us, us in certain subjects, it's something that we can all strive, I think, to have that accountability and to have another team player, someone that is on your side and can guide you. It's important in all aspects of life, whether that's in sports and fitness, learning, spirituality, whatever it is. I think it's a great thing.
Inspiration too. I
Oh,
would say like
absolutely.
accountability, yes, but being inspired by
Yeah.
someone, that's to me, that's worth money.
Oh, 100%.
You
Yeah.
know?
Yeah.
I
100%.
don't want to just be yelled at. I want to be told that I'm capable of more than I think I'm capable of and then pushed in that direction. That to me, it's like,
Right.
okay, how
Yeah.
much was this again? I'm in.
Yeah, because sometimes we don't believe in ourselves, right? But somebody else can
No.
see something in us and say, "Yeah, you got this.
Yes.
You got this, girl. You can do this," which is amazing.
Yeah,
Is there
and they are
anything? Yeah,
masters. They're
sorry. Go
masters
ahead.
of that sequence, like
Yes, yes.
when you're with like a real good coach that sees the sequence, they make it seem so simple that they almost talk you into achieving more.
Yeah, yeah,
And I was here to learn handstands. My gymnastics coach is like, listen, you're going to be throwing double back tucks. So I need you to understand how to do this right. And I'm like, hold on a second. What? Like, what are you talking about?
yeah,
I was here for splits and handstands very clearly.
yeah.
And his mind is already, you're so capable of more. And that to me is like a coach really worth like time and energy and investment and excitement.
Amazing. Yeah, that's great. Okay, Brooke, is there anything else that you wanted to share with us before we part ways for today? And I'm sure we'll have future conversations for sure. Anything else that we didn't talk about that we should have?
Um, just a little sprinkle of hope for people out there that are stuck in a chronic state of stress and anxiety, right? Or
Yeah.
over caffeination or overstimulation. And my heart breaks when I see like a brilliant dancer blow their ACL at 25 and
Yeah.
or a baseball athlete that blows their hip out and they're young. Is we have the tools to restore our youthfulness and we have the tools to drop the brain out of stress. But if we are locked into a state of stress, our body cannot heal. We cannot digest. Our immune system goes offline. So many people that think they're struggling with crazy diagnoses and autoimmune disease, I urge you to witness your breath rate. If you are breathing more than 20 breaths a minute when you're just sitting, you are going to be accidentally triggering the breath response or the stress response.
Yeah.
So as soon as we exceed that 25 breaths a minute, our brain waves are going to elevate, even if we're sleeping. So by bringing our awareness into our breath rate and trying to slow the breath to a 4 breaths per minute, which is so easy to do if you train at all. But even if you don't train, it's a 7-second inhale, it's an 8-second exhale. And by going through that for 4 minutes, no matter what chaos is going on around you, you will start to pull the brain and pull the nervous system back into a state of rest. And if you're teaching this to a child, you teach them to hum. Because when we hum, we're naturally lengthening our exhales and we hum until we're out of breath. I think that's
Yeah.
a real indicator. But we're also toning and activating those nerves that pull the body into a state of rest. But by understanding that we can be stuck in a stress state just because of our breath rhythm, I think can transform people's relationship to taking responsibility for their chronic anxiety. You're not chronically anxious, you're breathing too fast. And we need to slow down the noise. And when we slow down the noise, all of a sudden solutions to problems we didn't see start to appear. All of a sudden, some other possibility that was stressing us out starts to change. And when we start to dialogue with the interstitium of time, and we start to regulate the rhythm in which we experience time within our neurons, we start to feel more like creators. We start to feel more like champions. We start to see solutions that we didn't see. We start to access our imagination when we need to problem solve. Because if we're not activating our imagination in a problem solving mode, we're going to go back to the same loops we've tried. So new creative thought comes from theta. So the business owners that are out there that are up against a wall or a deadline and you're experiencing that stress and you're like, I'm trying to control my breath rate.
Yeah.
Take that 10-minute nap and allow your mind to work the way it's built. It's by detaching from the problem, by slowing the system down, that our neurons can do this thing, and they off-road. And the next thing you know, you have this perfect solution. And this has been used by inventors for the last couple centuries. It's our
Yeah.
bridge to gamma is by dropping into that childish state of mind.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
from the childish state of mind, that imagination of ours can kick into full-blown lucid visions. And to me, that's where the artists, the athletes under pressure, the thought leaders, we need to learn how to toggle switch there in 4 minutes, do
Yes.
the thing, and then be able to navigate chaos, because the
Mm-hmm.
world is certainly chaotic right now. And we need people showing up calm, cool, collected, with a laughter in their heart in order to
Yeah.
navigate these waters, you
Yeah.
know?
Oh yeah. Well, yeah. Thank you. Thank you for that, because I think that for people that are listening to this and listening to you and really taking it to heart, exactly what you're saying. It's an easy and simple practice, but you've got to do it, right? At the end of the day, you've got to do it. You've got to take, those few moments for yourself and not sort of rationalize it, not think too much about it, because that's a lot of people that have chronic stress, anxiety. It's like, oh, no, I can't do that. I can't do that. It's not possible, right? And you talk yourself out of it, but just do it. Just do it. Just take those moments, slow down the breath. And like you said, yeah, everything else will follow suit in a positive and healthy way. I want to thank you so much, Brooke. It was such a pleasure to have you speak to me today on the podcast. I know that we'll connect again in the future, and I want everybody to, definitely connect with you. How can they easily and most easily find you and connect with you?
My website is musicalbreathwork.com. I work with people all over the world with my one-on-ones, but I highly suggest people checking out my brain and breath connection lecture that really breaks down the chronological sequence of how this is all connected. It gives you the tools to break the stress loop, and it gives you a way to identify what's the weakest in your system. If you need to work on the fascia first, or if you need to work on the breath first. And then online, I have my breath course and my fascia course that are digital. So as soon as they're purchased, they show right up. They're broken into segments. They cover the science and the practices. And then in mid-August, I'll be launching my Gamma Seeker membership, which is a library of different sequences and patterns that we can do to restore balance and harmony within our systems.
Amazing. Well, I hope everybody connects with you, Brooke. And it was such a great talk that we had today. And good luck with all of your future endeavors as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you spreading the good word and the hope the way that you are.
Thank you so much. Okay. Bye.